The Cuban government has denounced the maneuvers of the United States to destabilize the island and reiterated the defense of its sovereignty in the face of foreign intervention. Peruvian President Pedro Castillo addressed the nation on the occasion of his first 100 days in office. Benin welcomed back nearly 30 royal treasures looted from the West African state during France's colonial rule more than 130 years ago. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez Parrilla denounced the maneuvers of the United States to destabilize the island during a press conference this Wednesday with the diplomatic corps accredited to the island. The Cuban government reiterated the defense of its sovereignty in the face of foreign intervention within the framework of international law. The foreign minister referred to the U.S. financing of groups in the island which are seeking to disrupt the rule of law and create a sense of chaos as part of the ongoing attempts to overthrow the Cuban Revolution.
Aggression from the United States. Their constant attempts that have been more strong in the last 8 months to generate destabilization attempts, to alter the people's tranquility, to harm our social peace, that are going to destroy this party for us.
And as part of the press conference with diplomats accredited to the Cuba, Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez announced details of the reopening of the country's borders.
Flights to Cuba will arrive massively. We will have the opportunity to receive our comrades that have been outside the country for a long time, for even financial difficulties that the pandemic brought to them. We will also receive tourists, international tourism, visitors from every part of the world.
And now we move on to other topics. Bolivian President Luis Arce Catacora rejected the attempts at destabilization by far-right sectors in the country and reiterated his government's commitment to justice and support for the most vulnerable sectors of the population. Addressing Aymara indigenous communities in La Paz, Arce assured that a new coup will not be allowed. We're calling for supporters to mobilize to defend the country from acts of destabilization and violence. The Bolivian president highlighted that far-right sectors, led by regional civic committees linked to the 2019 coup, have been instigating acts against the country's indigenous and rural communities. And the Mexican Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard announced on Wednesday that President Andrés Manuel López Obrador will meet with his U.S. counterpart, Joe Biden, and the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Washington on November 18th, as the U.S. hosts the first North American Leaders Summit since 2016. Among the key issues to be discussed are the COVID-19 pandemic, the economy, and migration.
And North American health security. President López Obrador has been insisting that what we have experienced cannot happen again. Difficulty of access to vaccines that can be produced, unequal access to medicines, to treatments, to medical equipment. Competitiveness, conditions for creating conditions for equitable, successful growth. How to strengthen supply chains in the region.
Ecuadorian President Guillermo Lasso granted a pardon to the former head of the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities, CONAIE, of Ecuador, by means of an executive decree, ahead of talks with senior leaders of the movement. Antonio Vargas was charged in 2017 for alleged land trafficking. President Lasso also extended the presidential pardon in favor of 2 other indigenous leaders detained during the widespread protests in October 2019 against the economic measures of then-President Lenin Moreno. The Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador has agreed to attend the talks proposed by the government in the midst of tensions due to the rise in fuel prices and the state repression of protesters. And Mexico has opened its first public clinic for transgender patients in a country where the trans community faces continued discrimination and violence. The clinic, whose creation was one of Mexico City Mayor Claudia Sheinbaum's campaign pledges, has 11 transgender women and men among its 32 workers. According to the activist, this helped patients to feel understood and supported. Housed in a 2-story building in the city center, the clinic has 2 general medical practitioners and 4 specialists. Although it does not offer surgery, if necessary, it can issue referrals for patients to be treated in other public hospitals.
I came here to the trans clinic to ask for support for a colleague who is very ill due to the cosmetic work. In hospitals, they did not want to treat her. She went to 7 hospitals and they denied her care. They didn't even want to touch her, check her, or clean her, and that is discrimination. One of the central objectives of this unit is that it is a trans population serving the trans population. It is fundamental. What does this mean? Understanding from peers to generate trust, empathy, and quality of service in the service.
We work to be able to give this shelter, not to see ourselves different in distinction, not to have this observation like, what are you, when we really are people, and this part should not exist.
Now we address other topics. Cuba's Finlay Institute of Vaccines has presented the results of trials on the use of booster shots in the immunization campaign against COVID-19. The head of the research at the Institute, Dagmar Garcia Rivera, outlined the results of studies on the use of Cuba's Soberana 01 and Soberana Plus vaccines, showing they are effective boosters that complement the 3-dose immunization plan already carried out across the country. 80% of the population has already been fully immunized. The booster shots are said to improve the body's immune response in the case of infection, guaranteeing greater protection for vulnerable sectors of the population. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. Peruvian President Pedro Castillo addressed the nation from the city of Ayacucho this Wednesday on the occasion of his first 100 days in office, highlighting the difficult reality the Peruvian people face when he took up the presidency.
He arrived in power, 3 million Peruvian people that had lost their jobs, and millions of Peruvian people that demanded a vaccine, and we found hundreds of social conflicts that had never been met. Forgotten peoples that had no water or electricity. Hospitals and schools that were destroyed and shattered.
President Castillo also highlighted the efforts of his government to improve the quality of life of all Peruvians.
We initiated the biggest water work in the country that has an investment of 1,200 million soles that will benefit San Juan de Miraflores and Villa María del Triunfo, among other works. We launched the program Peru in Marcha with an investment of 520 million soles. With them, we will implement 133 projects of water and black waters in the entire Peru.
The Peruvian president also referred to the progress made to improve the living conditions of the country's workers, with an increase in job opportunities and the minimum wage.
Suspension of work has been eradicated, and this affected thousands of our colleagues and workers. No formal worker will earn less than 1,000 soles a month until we reach a minimum wage. Over 6,000 workers that are informal workers have been incorporated to the electronic payroll through the system of inspection to work. And this insertion into these payrolls impacts over 400,000 people.
This Wednesday, the United States government announced new sanctions against Nicaragua, following a long-standing script of intervention as the U.S. continues to undermine the country's democracy and the recent elections. U.S. President Joe Biden signed into law a bill calling for more sanctions and other punitive measures against the government of Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega, after attacking the country's general elections even before the results were out. The so-called Renacer Act calls for sanctions of Nicaraguans deemed responsible for unfair elections, increased coordination of such measures with the European Union and Canada, and expanded U.S. oversight of international lending to Managua.
La crisis política en Nicaragua está en la agenda de la organización. Obviamente serán los países los que decidirán el nivel de aplicación de la Carta Democrática.
En Nicaragua se votó de manera libre.
And as expected, the Organization of American States is busy doing its dirty work following the elections in Nicaragua this past weekend. On Wednesday, OAS Secretary General Luis Almagro opened the organization's General Assembly with attacks on Nicaragua's democracy and electoral system. He was joined by representatives of the European Union, which has also refused to recognize the results of Sunday's general elections. In the face of the attacks, the Nicaraguan ambassador to the OAS, Arturo McFields, insisted that the bloc must cease its neo-colonialist and interventionist positions.
Nicaraguans voted freely. They voted freely, free from pressure, free from blackmail, free from interference, and free from sanctions. They voted with the freedom that comes from being Nicaraguan. We believe that this assembly is named after a renewed America that must look to the future and not to the past with neo-colonialist and interventionist positions.
Argentina will hold legislative elections on Sunday, which will determine the viability of the government program led by President Alberto Fernández and the Vice President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. We have more details with our correspondent Oscar Orquera.
From the De Todos Front, National Parliament member from the province of Entre Rios, Marcelo Casareto, underlines the importance of having majority at the nation's Congress.
We put at stake the possibility of supporting our government in its budget law, and what is believed as a general government plan or not. We have an opposition from Macri's government that was ruling for 4 years with very bad results. In this sense, what we are looking for is to consolidate a support for the government.
People's support and votes will enable a wider and better distribution of incomes after Argentina's growth of a 9% this year. However, from the De Todos fronts, they know that balance needs to be found.
That reaches a number of sectors of the economy, but not all of them. A number of sectors of society, but not all. This is why the state's presence is needed to guarantee that Argentina grows with equity and an important geographical distribution.
The De Todos front has not had majority at the deputy chamber in these last 2 years. But the deputy from Tucumán province and candidate to Senator Pablo Yedlin shows the importance of having a quorum.
That did not stop us from enacting more than 60 laws in 2020. That speaks of a dialogue intention from the part of the officiality and also from the opposition that certainly became hard, but which is a big challenge? Well, that of sustaining important minorities, because that's the only way to bring new regulations and implement them.
The 2021 budget, a new law for financial entities, and the new agreements with the International Monetary Fund are some of the regulations that the government of Alberta,
which is a law that seeks to promote and improve the quality of our nurses in Argentina. It is a law that has already been approved by the Health Commission and needs to go to debate. As to future projects, I'd love to work on a new law to access medicine. The truth is that access to medication is a fundamental health issue.
the Argentinian parliament, where the entire South American country is represented, will be renewed after next Sunday's vote in 2/3 of its Senate and half of its deputies.
Thank you, Oscar, for this report, and we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. Benin welcomed back nearly 30 royal treasures looted from the West African state during France's colonial rule more than 130 years ago. The artifacts, some considered sacred, arrived in the economic capital Cotonou by plane before being transported in 3 trucks escorted by horses to the presidential palace, where a ceremony was held to celebrate the event. Hundreds of people from all over the country thronged the streets to watch the treasures arrive. The return of the artifacts comes as calls mount in Africa for Western countries to hand back colonial spoils from their museums.
The symbolism of the return to Benin, of our soul, our identity, to use a word that is easier to admit, to understand. This return of the testimony of what we have been, the testimony of that which we have existed. I had little confidence that this claim would ever succeed, even less so in my lifetime.
We are going to celebrate this return until the end of the weekend to show that a great-grandson of King Huedubadja fought to bring these different goods back home.
I'm so happy, very proud to see our property that was in France, that the white people seized. It is our property. We know that our goods. It's our treasure. When we were told that it was going to come to Benin today, we, Abomeyans, are so proud and happy to have our treasure, which was in France.
Thousands of Tunisians rallied in Aghreb in the Sfax region after a demonstrator died of tear gas inhalation during heated demonstrations over the reopening of a landfill site in the midst of a general strike. The mobilization came the day after a regional garbage crisis degenerated into street clashes in the town. On Wednesday, the city held a general strike and thousands of people marched the 6 kilometers from the town to the landfill site, which served around 1 million people until it was closed in September under pressure from residents over contamination.
We went out today with great sorrow and deep feeling of injustice here in Aghreb. Over the past 24 hours, we have been witnessing the security forces protecting ways while crushing the citizens and trampling the rights of the residents to life, to a healthy environment and to a dignified life. The thousands of people you see here are not asking for something that is impossible or extraordinary. They are claiming the rights to life and to clean air, that's all. Close the rubbish dump and we'll leave. If you do not want to close it, we will stay here for weeks, months or even a year and keep on fighting until it's closed.
Now we continue in the region. Senegal has seen protests in the capital over the arrest of opposition leaders. Dozens of protesters took to the streets after two opposition figures were arrested. Ousmane Sonko, a politician accused of rape, and Barthélemy Diaz were arrested on Wednesday as violence broke out in the car over a high-profile court case involving Diaz, who is appealing his conviction in a fatal shooting. Hundreds of police in anti-riot gear were deployed around the court building and on the roads leading to it. The court proceedings went ahead in Diaz's absence, but were swiftly adjourned in response to a request from fellow defendant who said his lawyer was not present. And also this Wednesday, a Coast Guard patrol boat reported to have rescued 396 migrants on a fishing boat stranded near Pozzallo's port on the southeast coast of Sicily. More than 80 women and more than 50 unaccompanied minors, 9 of whom were children under the age of 5, were rescued. The migrants were from Syria, Bangladesh, Egypt, South Sudan, and the countries from the sub-Saharan Africa. According to the Coast Guard, rescue operations were very difficult due to the bad weather conditions and the shallow water. On Wednesday, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, expressed the European Union and the United States will hit Belarus with new sanctions as early as next week over the migrant crisis on that country's border with Poland. Following talks in Washington with President Joe Biden, von der Leyen said that we were then focusing on the situation on the EU-Belarus border. Meanwhile, Belarus denies the allegations but has said it will no longer stop migrants and others seeking to enter the EU, and that the migrant crisis was provoked by the EU itself, and it says that border Belarus. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.